Uncertainty produces anxiety, and anxiety places a person in a state of threat response. Living in such a state for any length of time degrades physical and mental health, and it prevents a person from being forward thinking, from consulting their creative energies, from cooperating with peers to plan for a future. So if you wanted to disable your enemy, you would make yourself highly unpredictable. We exist in a state of radical uncertainty. Almost every dimension of social life is unforeseeable 50 years into the future. We can project certain trends, but these only ever focus on one variable or another and don't give the complete picture. And this is a natural psychological response to the kind of radical uncertainty that we're facing. To narrow the scope of the problem and focus on one imaginable, idealized threat, put that at the center, and then develop a strategy around it. So in the alt-right, you make the racial demographics that central challenge. With the far left, maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, more so than today, but they make the socioeconomic demographic future the central threat. For the foreign policy minded, they make the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, global terrorism, maybe radical Islam, cyber terrorism, something like this, the central threat. Or climate change. There's all sorts of major threats that we can't really predict, but people, factions, pick their central threat and then develop a strategy around it. That's a way of coping with the radical uncertainty. But facing the fact of the radical uncertainty may allow us to build a strategy in an alternative sort of way, not a strategy based on predicting the future. Because if you focus on one of these variables or a small set of variables, you are predicting the future, because prediction is narrowing the scope of possible futures. That's what prediction is. So, building a strategy based on prediction in an unpredictable, uncertain world is not a prospect that you should invest in. Just look at the reality. We don't know what the economic system will be in 50 years. If we'll still be able to call it capitalism or if it'll be socialism. We don't know what the political systems around the world will be. It may swing far to the right. It may swing far to the left. We might be in a steady state. We're not really able to foresee this. And that's true to some extent throughout history, but in some eras, radical change is more conspicuous than in others. Like the late 18th century, yes, they were changing their mode of government in Europe, but at least then they kind of knew by historical precedent what democracies looked like. It was a different character of democracy, different technological climate, but still it wasn't kind of stepping out into the unknown in the way we are today, where any new form of government will incorporate artificial intelligence and the technocracy and mind control and propaganda and all of this suite of new technologies that we have to deal with. So the political future, economic future is uncertain. We don't know what the economy is going to look like in a year. We don't know what careers will be viable in 20 years. We don't know what the demographic future will be socioeconomically or racially. We don't know what technologies will exist a century from now, what the impact of artificial intelligence will be. There's just so many things we don't understand about our future. We can't understand. So I think the way that the media landscape has played into this is an emphasis on threat narratives, which are necessarily limited in scope, because that's compelling narrative commentary, and that's what people are attracted to. And so this is the direction that the mass psyche has moved towards, which is coping on the one hand, and it makes you feel like you're doing something. But what I'm saying is this is fundamentally wrong. It's mistaken. We're doing this the wrong way. We can't predict the future. We don't know exactly what set of threats to worry about. We don't know that the current global elite are putting forward a sustainable course or not. We don't know if they're going to last. None of this is certain. So we can't, hedge, or rather, we can't invest everything in any one of these possible futures. We have to hedge our bets. And Nassim Taleb is hitting on exactly this problem, the unpredictability of the future. And he says that in 100 years, the only systems that will survive are those that are anti-fragile. They don't rely on prediction. They absorb shock. They actually grow from a turbulent environment. Other systems failing are to the advantage of anti-fragile systems, and these are structured in a particular way. You can read Anti-Fragile to look at some of the characteristics of these sorts of systems, but clearly, focusing on your niche issue is not the solution. So we put attention on these narratives. Different speakers have their narrative of what the situation is, and we're all directing attention toward this central sacred threat. And that's kind of the formation of our communities, and that makes the individual peripheral and the media narrative central. And it's a wide diversity of media narratives and overlapping spheres, but the alternative to this would be to look at each other as potential partners in organization rather than mutual ideologues. Ideas are not the way forward. Cooperation and building organization is, and that starts with communication. So ideas are important in providing integration to communication, to aligning thinking, but that is not the end in itself. That's a means to an end. The secondary effect of this ideological cooperation should be economic cooperation. The systems that survive will be the anti-fragile ones. They'll be the ones that don't rely on prediction. And if you're just acting by default, you are acting under the assumption that the current economic paradigm is just going to keep chugging along. It may not. There's a strong probability that it won't. And it's not just threats coming from human action. There's also cosmological threats, asteroids, electrical storms, possibilities that even the elites can't plan for. And in the long run, this is another Taleb point, these black swan events that we don't incorporate in our models for prediction are statistically guaranteed. So over several hundred years, there's no possibility that the economic system we're living under now is just going to keep going. Radical change will happen. So you build a system that's immune to radical change, or that's strengthened by radical change. So yeah, if you look at what the elites are afraid of, they're not really afraid of things like the alt-right. They used the alt-right. They always use these ideological movements. They are way more savvy with the manipulation of public consciousness than any fringe intellectual. They have way more research, much more money to invest in disseminating ideas. They can hire professionals to do this full time. It's not a problem for them. They're not worried about radical ideas. They're worried about radical ideas that result in persistent communities. That's why they radicalize fringe ideologies with agent provocateurs. They don't want people forming viable new ways of life. Because you look at it, the grid is only so large, and they create taboos about going off grid, about being a crazy prepper, crazy conspiracy theorist. And so, we often refer to this meme of going off to the mountains and detaching from the grid, and we speak of it disparagingly because the scope of our imagination is small, because our prediction of the future is small, because we want to minimize the variables we're looking at to avoid this anxiety about an unpredictable future. But it's foolish thinking, it's narrow-minded thinking, it's weak thinking, and it's not about going off-grid, it's about establishing a new grid, a different kind of grid that's more resilient, not depending on the grid established by your enemies. That's just stupid. Why would you live on the resources provided by your enemies, where they could take everything you have away at a moment's notice? Same reason why you don't depend on the manufacturing of a potential geostrategic rival. Because if we go to war with China, what are we going to say? China, will you please manufacture our heavy machinery for us so that we can fight you with it? No, of course not. That's not going to work. So likewise, you don't depend on the grid. You build a new grid. So the elites know that there is a lot of territory out there that we can buy, we can control land, and we can build a new economic system. We can use these alternative agricultural technologies, alternative communications technologies, soon alternative transportation technologies to create a whole new kind of infrastructure. The technological climate is prime for that. It's ready for that. The soil is very fertile in that respect. And so they want us preoccupied by current political happenings, watching videos on YouTube about politics. I know a lot of people waste time with that. And yeah, they don't want us actually building a viable alternative. It is definitely possible. It's certainly possible. And it's not just about a fringe group of people doing this, but if you can produce an economic model that's more efficient than them, then you can recruit others at their advantage. And so recruitment will be easy. If you can say, we created this, so to speak, off-grid smart city with all these amenities, and plus it's going to be cheaper for you, and we have a job for you because we've integrated all these things, and it's not this kind of mass corporate system. First of all, you speak to ideological needs of the people who are concerned about climate change, the people who are concerned about the corporatization of the economy, and also, obviously, people on the right more concerned about traditionalism. Think about it this way. Why would you advocate traditional ideology if you know that people change their life on the basis of their economic conditions? If someone stands to gain from espousing a political ideology, they typically will do so. People have their political views and their moral views because it's advantageous to them. So what kind of circumstance will lead to people adopting traditional ideology, traditional social formations? So small communities where you're accountable, where you don't just move from town to town and your reputation gets lost in the mix. And you can create now a custom reputation by careful management of your social media presence, which cultivates a society of sociopathy and narcissism. But anyway, where you live in a local context, people get to know your character and, long term keep a mental image of who you are. That leads to traditional morality, because that's the only way. Traditional morality is the only way to actually get along in small social groups. So individual communities of all different types, and I mean just socially speaking, demographically speaking, what they're composed of, small communities will encourage traditionalism. So instead of advocating traditional ideology, maybe understand the traditional ideology in its place and talk with like-minded people to then cooperate and build a traditional kind of structure, or if not a traditional structure, if it's a revolutionary structure, perhaps a structure which facilitates the traditional moral scheme. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. So it's not about preaching the ideology to change people's minds, change their material conditions, change their way of life, and their minds will change. That's why the globalists get so many people to convert to their ideology, because people stand to gain from it. They go to college, they go to the big corporation, and they gain by joining the prevalent mainstream ideology. So create a more effective alternative that is possible today. We can do this. Create an effective economic alternative where their needs can be met and their social needs to a greater degree than in the system, and they will adopt your ideology. Ideology comes first only insofar as it allows a small group to synchronize their thinking and then produce a product which is offered to others. And if that product benefits others, then they will assimilate to the traditional way of thinking or your particular ideology. So basically, people in these online spheres are just wrong-headed altogether. It's not about focusing on the ideas to project them out. It's about focusing on the ideas to create cooperation, but we're not doing that. The kind of discourse we need is actually at a higher ideal level, because to create that synchronization, you need deep philosophical consensus, not this kind of ad hoc aesthetic consensus that we've stumbled upon. That works in a local context to an extent, because norms can develop organically and culminate in a deep level of integration. But online, this doesn't happen. The best you're going to get is this kind of meme culture that we developed. But to reach deep intellectual synchronization, you need deep philosophical consensus. That means at the metaphysical, ontological, epistemological, cosmological, and ethical levels. And of course, our methods of discourse are not conducive to this, because we're all concerned about getting likes and views and Streamlab donations and whatnot. And that's not the winning strategy. You can see that is provided as a possible distraction. If the elites thought that that was the real danger, then they wouldn't make this a viable income opportunity for people like JF and Nick Fuentes. Like, good on them for capitalizing on the situation, I suppose, but they're also playing into the enemy's hands. You're basically working for Google. You're working for the corporation that represents the globalist ideology that you're speaking against. Clearly, this is a trap. Clearly, this is a distraction from the more significant issue. And we need that deep philosophical consensus. So, I've said this before, but people need to be interested in metaphysics and epistemology and all of that, because if they're not, I don't know that any group of people is going to get integrated enough to want to cooperate economically and to actually form a community together. There's also, not just ideal aspects to community formation, but also biological, physical aspects where, saying that you want to form a community with someone is a fairly, sexual act in actual fact, because you're saying, I want you in my breeding population. You're not saying, these are people of the same gender, same sex often. So you're not saying, I want to reproduce with you in particular, but you're saying, I want you in a community of people where your children might reproduce with my children, or your grandchildren might with my grandchildren. That's what you're saying. You're saying, let's put our genes together. So that's, by definition, a sexual act. And to reconciling yourself to that, I don't know, that's fairly personal and real, and we're fairly ideological and fake. It's about personas, not about deep realities. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Just a restatement of a critique that I've given many times, advocating for the same thing I have advocated for years, but it's the only alternative. So, and I will take any ideological comer. If you have a philosophical disagreement with me at any of those basic levels, come on my channel and debate it with me. That's what we need. We don't need appealing to people's demand for entertainment. Now, luckily, I enjoy debate and I find it entertaining, so I would watch that kind of discussion. But yeah, it's I don't know, the clock's running out, because this land out there that we could be developing is not going to last forever. Environmental excuses are being produced to, nationalize that by the state, and the price of land is going up. and it's just regulations are becoming more strict over time. The opportunity is narrowing. You know, it would have been easier 4 years ago than it would be today, and 4 years from now it'll be harder still. So anyway, think and act. Thank you for listening.